last Sunday, Singapore Prime Minister Mr. Lee Hsien Loong issued a wake-up call during his National Day rally speech. He said climate change is one of the gravest challenges that the human race is facing. And that's not all. Singapore is already feeling its impact, which is likely to worsen over the next few decades. That is why Singapore must treat climate change defences like how we treat the SAF, with utmost seriousness.
Prime Minister Lee also went on to list out the measures that our country will be undertaking to prepare Singapore for the impact of climate change. And today we have a special guest in the studio with us on Singapore Today, Mr. Masagos Zulkifli, the Minister for the Environment and Water Resources. He joins us to talk more about Singapore's efforts to mitigate and to adapt to the adverse effects of climate change, and also our recycling and waste management efforts. Minister Masagos, welcome to Singapore Today, and thank you for making time for us.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Lance.
Good evening, sir. Let's dive straight into this, Minister. We don't do anything about climate change. What will Singapore look like in, say, 50 to 100 years?
Well, climate change means different things to different people and different places in the world. The most known fact about climate change is how temperatures has risen and continue to rise because of human activities, and more so in this decade and in this century than ever before. When I was growing up, for example, the highest temperature was 27 degrees. I mean, that's a very nice temperature. Today, 27 degrees is the average temperature. I think yesterday was 32 degrees and it felt like 34. And when temperature goes up like that, there are a few impacts that can be felt all over the world. Generally speaking, it will affect the weather. You will see more intense weather, strong, heavy rains, and droughts that happens more frequently than ever before. That will affect our water supply, will affect food, will affect issues around pests and so forth. But for Singapore specifically, because the ocean is always expanding because of this temperature rise above it. And even if we could reduce it somehow and as quickly as we can, some of this temperature rise has already been trapped within the oceans. And depending on how they interact with the colder part of the ocean, whether we like it or not, it will take a longer time for the expansion of the sea to recede. And this expansion of the sea is what causes sea level rise, together with glacial as well as Antarctica and Greenland ice sheet melts. Therefore, for Singapore, the first impact we feel, of course, is the temperature rise, but more existentially is sea level rise. Scientists in Singapore have been working for many years, and our conclusion is that by the end of the century, we'll see at least or something like 1 meter rise of sea level. 1 meter rise of sea level is doesn't look big, but as PM has explained, you add on that 2 meter rise of high tide, and then 1 meter of water that comes from severe heavy storm on land, which means you have to take care of 4 meter level rise, which is a very difficult problem to overcome.
Obviously, great impact on the environment. And if you look further, could it also impact the economy, jobs?
But if we do nothing about it, certainly it will. Therefore, we have to take immediate and long-term measures to ensure that our coast is well protected. And there are many ways to do this. There are engineering solutions. And because this problem is going to come upon us slowly over the next century, over the next decades, if we start now, then we can certainly build over time. And if we start too late, then calamity may just come over us.
Singapore has signed on to the Paris Climate Agreement in 2016. It is cutting its carbon emissions. But we are a small player. How important is it for us to set an example and mitigate climate change?
Indeed, Singapore only emits something like 0.11% of the total global emission. But our principle and philosophy is that everybody, whether big or small emitters, should and must play their part. Only then can you be credible. And in Singapore, we have put a lot of measures to what we call mitigating this climate change effect, which means that we try put in measures, policies that will reduce our greenhouse gas emission. Our nationally determined commitment is to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by 2030 by 36%, based on what you call business as usual from our 2015 levels. And that means that we have to do a lot, really a lot, to make sure that our industries are transformed, our transport sectors do not contribute anymore or even less gas emission, as well as our bidding. So these three sectors, building, industry, as well as transport, make the bulk of our transmission. For our industry, for example, we have already given a signal. We are imposing a carbon tax. At this moment, $5 per kiloton. And then by 2030, signaling to them that it will double, if not triple. What will we do with this money? It's not a fiscal measure. We are not going to use this money to build houses or to pay for medical expenses and so forth. We will plow it back into our industry to allow them to make transformation so that they will consume less energy, be more energy efficient, at the same time reduce the greenhouse gas emission. We are about the only country actually which has imposed this kind of tax to transform the industry and also make no exemption. And therefore, any industry that wants to come here, and those are already here, should know that they will have to pay for the greenhouse gas emission.
What can we, the people, do? I know we have to save the planet,
Yes.
and you're talking about industries and corporates banding. What can we do?
Well, Singaporeans and as anybody around the world, we want to enjoy the comforts of modern life. But it also means that we have to, at the same time, be responsible in our consumption, what we call sustainable consumption. There are many things we can do. Number one, for example, if we talk about, say, energy consumption, can we turn our air condition at 24 degrees instead of at 18 degrees and then pull a blanket over us whole night? Could we turn on the air condition for just, say, maybe 3 hours at night before we sleep and then turn on the fan so that when the room has cooled down, it's already comfortable? Or could we, for example, think about how we can reduce waste so that we move away from a paradigm of taking, making, and throwing away to one where we first reduce the amount of waste we produce in the first place and disposing it in a way that it can be reused, recycled again and again.
Prime Minister Lee also said that our young people instinctively appreciate the seriousness of climate change.
Absolutely.
How about the older generations? Are they embracing change as well? Because sometimes I go to the supermarket and I see people who are slightly older and they're still carrying 15, 16 supermarket plastic bags.
Yes.
And every item of fruit or vegetable
Needs a bag.
needs a plastic bag.
I think this is a consequence of what we have done well, meaning we've asked in the 70s, in the 60s, to ask everybody to bag their trash. And because of that, we have preserved the environment problems that may arise when we don't bag your trash. And then after we bag our trash, the trash is brought to an incineration plant and then they are incinerated. So we do not have a situation where our plastic bag end up in water, in streams, and then into the ocean. In any case, all our reservoirs, all our rivers are dammed up. It's part of our reservoir system. So we do not have the same problem as other countries where they may landfill this plastic bag and then it end up as microplastics in bellies of fish and so forth that we eat. Having said that, we should and must reduce the use of plastic. I think if you just take as much as we need and then bag the trash, the plastic bag in reality is also being transformed back into energy. It is something like a postponed burning of fossil fuel from what we need into bag first and then back into energy through our incineration plant. But the problem today, as you rightly mentioned, Lance, is that we take too many. And sometimes we are given too many, and we happily take it away. And I do not want to make it a non-virtue of not using the plastic bag, but I think excessive use of plastic bag is where the problem really is.
So how can we get us older people to understand and embrace climate change better?
Well, I'm glad the Prime Minister actually put this as one of the pieces that he thought is important for Singaporeans to understand, to be aware of. In my conversations with many seniors post NDR, many of them said, wow, I've heard about climate change, I've read a lot about climate change, but I never knew how it will affect Singapore. They are very happy that we are going to do something about it. They are very alarmed that it will cost a lot of money. But it has raised their awareness about the impact of climate change, and that indeed all of us should and can play a part.
Can we talk about the younger generation? Because obviously you come into contact with them and you're seeing their efforts. You must be so proud that some of them are taking this on and doing so much for the environment.
Yes, I am. In fact, many young people have actually given up probably lucrative jobs, careers, to go into sustainable education, advocating for sustainability and so forth. And I'm glad that for most of them, they understand the pragmatic approach of balancing the need for progress, growth, jobs, as well as for sustainability. The kind of thing that Singapore has done well since we became independent. We've never pursued progress and sacrificed an environment in the same breath. In fact, we've always taken environment into consideration every time we talk about progress and also even industrialization. So now if that was what our philosophy was in the past, it works well for us for the future, because today is not just about environment, but also about the long-term impact of climate change to Singapore. And I'm glad that this philosophy, this paradigm, is well entrenched in our children, in our youth, and they're taking up this cause. But they do not just do it to grab attention. They do not just do it to look like a Me Too kind of thing. Many of them actually understand the science, and they know the very little things that they do together and advocating for them will make a difference.
They believe in the cause. They absolutely do, don't they?
That's why I'm so happy about it too.
Now, PM Lee said that the Centre for Climate Research Singapore has found out that Singapore is more vulnerable to climate change than the global model suggests.
Yes.
What exactly was found out? How are we more vulnerable?
Well, the CCRS was founded around 2013. And it's because the climate science at that time, even before that, was mostly around weather impact in the temperate belts. In the temperate belt, you could even predict weather 3 days ahead, because this is what you call big weather systems. But for us, the impacts of climate change from weather patterns could be one where how do you predict how frequent intense weather could be, if you can, and how will that actually impact on, say, aviation, navigation, and so forth. And at the same time, how does it look like for the tropical belt, which nobody has done any research on. And it means, to make it in simple terms, to bring down the grid from 15-kilometer cells down to 1.5 kilometers and running it on supercomputers. Mind you, they took 1 whole year before the results came out. And even after the result came out, to finesse it, they say it'll take another 1 year. But from these predictions and from this guidance that we got from the scientists is why we are worried and why we have decided we have to take very drastic steps, although they're in incremental steps over the next decades and centuries to protect our coast.
I'm very keen as well to find out about Singapore's recycling efforts, Minister. Singapore will be launching the Zero Waste Master Plan soon. What can you tell us about it, please?
Well, this year we have launched what we call Zero Waste Singapore, which means that we want our citizens to understand and people who live in Singapore that we are serious about managing our waste. And that also contributes to how we can mitigate for climate change too. Because as I mentioned before, in the past where we think about resources as something we take and then make and then throw away, the linear way of managing our resources is not sustainable. Think about how we have managed our water. We consume our water, and then we recycle it back into the system, our used water, and then put it back in the system again and again. And that's how we should also use every other resource that we have. And waste, as I remember when I was reading a comprehension passage in secondary 2, is actually a human concept. Nothing in nature is actually wasted. Everything gets recycled. Everything gets reused and then becomes nutrition for nature. I think humans must learn to think that way too. Now, therefore, the Zero Waste Master Plan means how can we not waste anything, put it all into what we call a circular economy. Whatever they are, metals, plastics, and we will focus on 3 streams. One will be food waste, another one will be packaging waste, and the last one will be e-waste.
This is the circular economy you're talking about. I think of the old days. We used to do that.
Yes,
Didn't we?
did. Yes.
But we've forgotten how to do that.
I think also because the industries that supported it have disappeared. I remember my mom every day will put away waste food in a container and someone will come and give her eggs in exchange for food waste. And
A bit of barter.
Yeah.
yes,
How cool is that?
and this food waste is fed then to maybe pigs or chicken, and well, that's the best way to
Yes.
get rid of our food waste. Today we don't have those industry anymore, but there's a lot of use for food waste, even when they're wasted, so to speak.
Which is, I guess, something that's quite sad as well. We've become the throwaway
Yeah.
generation.
Absolutely.
We
We
don't
have.
recycle. We don't find ways of maybe passing it on to someone else who may
Yeah.
need it too.
And I think it's too easy.
Yeah.
Because we have what we call maybe a backstop solution. Everything you give to us, we'll just incinerate it away. And I think we have to stop that because Semakau landfill, at the rate we are increasing our waste and dumping into our landfill, we will run out by 2035.
Yeah, Prime Minister Lee said it could end up being mountains.
Semakau, yes, Gunung Semakau.
That's right. Will there be new laws on waste
Yes.
recycling?
Yes. So the law will be passed sometime in September, and we will be concentrating, like I said, in these 3 main streams: the e-waste, food waste, as well as packaging waste. For e-waste, for example, we will require that producers report the amount of electronic products or electrical products they put in the market, the tonnage, and then later on, we will then require a certain percentage to be recovered, and they have to report it, and they have to recycle it and recover materials from it. When we do this, we also take away the toxicity that e-waste does to our landfill. There are a lot of heavy metals in our e-waste that if we could separate away from our incinerated bottom ash, this bottom ash will have less toxics, and then we can reuse it later on. That's for e-waste. For food waste, there are many things we're going to do. One, for example, if by 2025, we are going to have a co-located solid waste management and sludge waste management. The latter to produce new water, and the former to basically co-digest food waste and sludge to produce biogas. And this biogas, if we do it because we co-digest them, we can produce 3 times more biogas than if we do it separately. And that will also help us to not use electricity from the grid, and then will allow us to power this waste management plant as well as sell electricity into the grid. We also will require big malls, big establishments which have F&B in them to digest on site. So when you digest food on site, then you can produce compost, and the compost can then be used for the landscape and whatever. But more importantly, it also will prevent these food waste, which smells, which is really a lot of water being transported from one end of the island to another end of the island, and then we are actually, at the end of the day, incinerating water, and we don't want that. If we can do that, then we will also at the same time reduce the amount of energy used in transportation, energy used in incineration, and change this food waste into something useful. We have done a pilot in our Tampines hub where we are co-digesting something like 1 ton of food waste a day. From this 1 ton of food waste, we are only producing something like 70 kilograms of compost because the rest is water. But the consequence or the advantage of that, we now have discovered, number one, we only need to truck 1 load of garbage a day instead of 4, sorry. So from 4 to 1. Secondly, because the food is all contained in these machines to produce the compost, no smell, no pests. So the back of house is really clean and so hygiene that I will bring any visitor behind to show them at any time of day. And we want to replicate this across more F&B and then find how we can use food waste even for something useful.
Minister, how about schools as well?
Yeah.
Universities,
Yes.
polytechnics, colleges,
Well,
secondary schools.
There are many exciting things we can do with food waste. But again, like every waste, we must first try to reduce them. We must not produce them in the first place. But when we do, we have to use it in ways that we can put it back into the system.
I mean, that is a key point. If you don't produce it, then you won't have to treat any of this.
Absolutely. But inevitably, there will be some waste.
Of course.
If we can reduce them, and even when we reduce them, we can still aggregate them. I want to make one other point, which is when we commingle waste, then it becomes useless. When we separate e-waste from our recyclables, then our recyclables become not contaminated. So is the case for the e-waste. If our food is separated from our recyclables are fully recyclable. And that's the problem of our blue bins today, because when we put food and throw food into our recyclable bins, the blue bin, then becomes something you have to throw away in the first place.
You
Yeah,
can't.
look, sometimes I'm guilty of that too, unfortunately. So how do we make sure they are not contaminated? Do we need to wash out some of the containers before we put it into the blue bin?
That's all you have to do.
That's all.
That's all you
rinse
have
it
to do.
out.
Just rinse it out and make sure you put no food into our blue bins, and then later on when we separate our food away from our trash, put no trash into our food.
Yes, no trash in the blue bins and just rinse things out.
You also announced in July that your ministry will convene a citizens work group by September to get 50 Singaporeans from different backgrounds to work with the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources on solutions to improve the way recycling is done. What's being planned with this work group, and can people apply to join?
Yes, they can. Anyone can apply to join. This work group is, I would say, an experiment for government to engage citizens and citizens to engage government. And I think in future, a top-down approach where the government knows and tells people what needs to be done may not be something. This may not be the way we govern. Certainly, there will be some decisions the government must own. The government must explain and must earn its right to continue governing. But then there are many other policies which we could consult and honestly co-create, not already have a view and just ask people, what do you think about it? No, I think that in future, we really have to start from a blank sheet and say, we have a problem, let's see how we can solve this. So we need to focus the citizen work group on a problem. And I think that one of the problems, like I mentioned just now, is the blue bin. Should we legislate? How do we educate? How do we make sure that we can increase the recyclability of our blue bin from 40% to 60%, even 100%? And I think this is something that if we can get the process right, then we can start to look at even more difficult problems in future.
That's the word, the process.
Yes, it is.
And then it's also the mindset change.
Yes, from both, from the
Yeah.
government as well as from citizens.
Yeah, and so this work group will then be of use and become a place that people can give suggestions.
Yes.
There may be issues that you
Yes.
may not know about, and
Absolutely.
you may have issues also.
Yes, and also when they talk to each other, they also start to understand
Yeah.
what trade-offs they have to make.
Let's move along to talk about mitigating climate change, shall we? And PM Lee announced on Sunday during the rally that probably $100 billion or even more will be spent on protecting Singapore against rising sea levels. One plan is to build polders and dikes along the eastern coastline. Tell us more about this.
Well, in the first place, if I may correct you, Susan, mitigation means bringing down the emission of
Yes.
GHG.
Right.
What we are talking about is adaptation.
Right.
It is technical. It doesn't matter. I mean, the point is that we have to do something about
Yes.
climate change.
Yes.
So in the case of coastal protection, we are doing this because we already know that the sea level is going to continue to rise. It's a question of how much and by when. And for Singapore, there are many alternatives. Polder is one of them. Polder means you have a seawall and then you drain the water out and have pumps that will then keep pumping the water out when we have rains or flooding that we want to avoid. The other way you can do reclamation. I mean, build a higher platform for above 4 meters, like what we are doing for, say, Changi Airport or for the Tuas Megaport. There are many, many options. But this $100 billion will be spent over almost a century, which means that we have an opportunity now to actually choose and learn from what we do over the years. We don't have to do big projects immediately. At the same time, I think it's also useful for us to look at this the action we're taking in terms of opportunities we're also creating. We'll be able to produce or to run programs and projects which we can actually export solutions for in other countries that need them. Climate change is double-edged sword. If you look at it as a problem, yes, it is a problem. But if you look at it as also an opportunity, it will also will require us to create solutions for which we can benefit everybody. And therefore, in coastal protection too, as we spend $100 billion, we are already looking at not just fortifying our coasts, we are looking at beautifying them. We are actually looking at enhancing the value of this new coastal fronts that we're going to have. This is well illustrated by PM's show of what the greater southern waterfront will be like. And that will be replicated, I believe, throughout our coast.
I heard that only 2 cities are ahead of the game, Monaco and Singapore.
Yes, the economist said that.
Yeah.
He said something like, if you're not you're not Monaco or Singapore, don't think about it, or something like that.
Can I ask you, Minister, for something that's quite personal? What was the saddest thing you've seen in the environment that really, really struck a chord with you?
I think we have done too many things too well, too fast, that we've got it easy. So the consequence of doing something too well, too fast is we become a little lazy sometimes. So you look at the contrast between how the Japanese don't litter their street and they don't have litter bins. Whereas we don't litter our streets because we have a lot of litter bins. And when we have a lot of litter bins, we also need cleaners, we need to incinerate, we have to do a lot of things. So I think if we can move over time, our society, over this sense of responsibility for the environment, for climate change, we'll do things cheaper, we'll do things better, and we'll do things because we are gracious too. And I'm happy that if we can't do it now in a big way, I'm very optimistic we'll do it much better in the next generation.
Do we have to wait for the next generation, though?
I'm patient. In the meantime, like I say, we have a backstop.
You mentioned earlier about the carbon tax, about it being $5 a ton.
Yes.
And this whole climate change problem, it is urgent. There is an urgency to this. And I think when people think 100 years, they'll go, oh, well, you know what? There is time. But there is no time, right? So this $5 is going to be fixed until 2023, as it was
2030.
2030. Is this too low?
Well, there are many things we need to do and we have done to mitigate climate change. Basically, to transform the industry, to transform the way we live and consume so that we consequently produce less GHG. So for the industries is to impose this $5 tax. And when we start imposing this $5 tax per kiloton, we also have to start the industry to get used to measure, report, and verify. And this is a very difficult process because this is about checking whether you are reporting it properly. We are checking it whether you are going to pay. Are you paying too much, too little? All these things. That's why we need to get the industry in line to do this thing. But it's already a very strong signal. It's telling all the industries that if you are here now, you better transform because if not, you're going to pay a lot through the carbon tax. But you are coming here, you know very well we are a country that takes climate change and environment very seriously. And if you're going to produce a lot of GHG, don't come here.
Mr. Masagos, let's move on from climate change to another part of PM Lee's speech. You are also the Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs. On Sunday, PM Lee noted that the Malay community has progressed because of the community's strong emphasis on education. He highlighted that the number of Malay first-class honours graduates jumped tenfold between 2007 and 2017 from 7 graduates to 70. You must be very pleased with this.
Yes, I am, certainly. I think the Malays in Singapore are distinct in a sense of how they distinguish themselves from the Malays in other parts of our region. And I have somewhat summarized this into 3 factors that make them really distinct. One is competence, that they acquire this competence through their love and value for education. And over the years, over the decades, many Malays now look at education as the top priority. And PM has now asked us, don't just look at starting at primary 1, start even earlier. Not even at K1, start even earlier. And don't worry about the finances because nobody will be deprived of a good education if your circumstances somehow say you can't afford it, because this is not, Singapore will ensure that you will be able to acquire whatever dreams you have if you educate yourself. The second factor which I thought, which I've said has distinguished the Malays in Singapore is also character. And this character comes from our cultural identity as well as how we have been able to be moderate in our practice of Islam, be tolerant of others, be embracing of the diversity that Singapore has. And it's so unique that many dignitaries come here and say, are really in awe how Muslims here can not just coexist, actually live with and accepted as part of the diverse fabric of what Singapore is made. And then finally, citizenry. Because even as we may be the same culturally, religiously with the region, Indonesia, Malaysia, we are very clear, we are Singaporean. We want to serve national service. We want to be part of what it means to be Singaporean. And I think it is more in the substance that we bring to the table. And that is through education. And that's through how we behave with each other. And that is why Singapore is just such a beautiful garden, like I say, with many flowers that makes us something that everyone is amazed at.
PM Lee also noted that there are more Malay parents and their children, they're attending KMM, or Kelas Mata Matika, organized by M-Cube organizations. Tell us more about this.
Now, PM rightfully has made a call for Malay Muslims to basically start education as early as possible. That can be done, and that's about having as many institutions, schools as close as possible to where they live. But sometimes we think that we can do a little more than what the government is offering in terms of the pedagogy and so forth. And that is how we enable strong families to ensure that parents know how to educate their children, parents know what kind of nutrition their children need. And in one area where we are concerned about, which is about mathematical cognition, it is something that we know can be formed early if parents know how to communicate with their children. And mathematics is not just about numbers. It's not just about adding or subtracting. It's actually how you think. And we can teach this through parents. I give you a simple example. If you tell your children to put forks together and spoons together, that's maths. Or you get them to arrange things from small to large, that's maths. And you can do this at home. And we have found that when we get parents to come to these courses, the KMM courses, the outcome when the children go to their primary school, they are ready for school, they're not frightened of maths, they actually are not even frightened of languages like English or Malay. So they're really better off. And statistically, this is something, so the outcome and the quality of the outcome is something we're very proud of. And we want to really expand the number of beneficiaries who can get from this.
This is a sort of empowerment as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And also to shift the paradigm from, I don't know how to do it, only teachers know how to do it,
Yes.
to one where I can make a difference. And the parents are really the people who not just are important to imbibe values, but also this ability to learn and the love for knowledge. And really, it doesn't really matter what race, what strata of society you come from. In Singapore, we can make a difference.
Well, from early education, let's go on to higher education. Next year, MUIS, the Islamic Religious Council, will launch the Postgraduate Certificate in Islam in Contemporary Societies, PCICS, meant for religious teachers who were educated overseas and returning home. Why is this necessary?
Well, as I mentioned just now, character is one of the distinguishing characteristic of Malay Muslims in Singapore. And that has been possible because for the longest time, our religious teachers have guided us to learn how to live in such a diverse society, even as a minority, how to respect people and how to live in a very open world. And going forward, our religious teachers now can afford to go overseas, and we don't want to stop them. But as they come back, we also want them to understand that the context of how Islam is practiced in our particular situation, like Singapore, as a minority, as a contributing citizen, as a progressive people, is something that they need to bring back that knowledge and align themselves together. They are very diverse. If you study in Medina, you study in Egypt, you will study quite different things. And what you study also is what I call Empire Islam, things that you could do as a majority Muslims in a majority country when they are in power. But when in Singapore, we have to work, we have to live with others, and therefore we do really need to learn how to do this better, differently.
In Singapore, Islam is practiced in a spirit of mutual respect, tolerance, inclusiveness. So the Prime Minister also talked about developing a model for Singapore's own Islamic college, which will one day train a new generation of Asatiza in Singapore. Perhaps they don't have to go overseas then and gain some of that knowledge here in Singapore. Tell us more about this.
I think this is a longer-term dream for us to produce a college where we can not just guide and produce graduates who can be impactful to our community, but also benefit every other communities around the world, which are also minorities and need to learn how to navigate in life, in their lives as Muslims. But that's a little long-term plan. For now, next year, we will be requiring all the returnees to go through a 1-year postgraduate certificate in Islamic contemporary studies, so that this will start them aligning, start them to understand how to teach Islam in our context. At the same time, also to get them to understand how effective they need to be in their pedagogy in addressing a totally young new generation that they're going to face over the next decade. In the process, we also hope to identify talents who we can give scholarships, who we can nurture, sharpen to become our experts, and then become the faculty for this Islamic college. I don't think it will serve any purpose if we produce a college now and everyone who teach there are people who don't understand what it means to practice Islam in our context.
Minister Masagos, I wish we could have you stay and talk more with us.
Yes, thank you so much
But
for having
thank
me.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
for staying and talking with us on such a wide range of topics today. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for your time.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Lance.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.